A Dance in Fire by Wayhan Jarth. Written and distributed just after the warp in the west. Originated in the province of Cyrodiil. Entered into the Synod Library on the 25th of last seed, 4th era, 452. Dictated by head scribe Cassius Quill to the scribe Maxima Bruchius for transcription. Volume 1. Scene: the Imperial City, Cyrodiil. Date: 7 Frostfall, 3E 397. It seemed as if the palace had always housed the Atreus Building Commission, the company of clerks and estate agents who authored and notarized nearly every construction of any note in the empire. It had stood for 250 years, since the reign of Emperor Magnus, a plain-fronted and austere hall on a minor but respectable plaza in the Imperial City. Energetic and ambitious middle-class lads and ladies worked there, as well as complacent middle-aged ones like Decimus Scotti. No one could imagine a world without the commission, least of all Scotti. To be accurate, he could not imagine a world without himself in the commission. "Lord Atreus is perfectly aware of your contributions," said the managing clerk, closing the shutter that demarcated Scotti's office behind him. "But you know things have been difficult." "Yes," said Scotti, stiffly. "Lord Venek's men have been giving us a lot of competition lately, and we must be more efficient if we are to survive. Unfortunately, that means releasing some of our historically best, but presently underachieving senior clerks." "I understand. Can't be helped." "I'm glad that you understand," smiled the managing clerk, smiling thinly and withdrawing. "Please, have your room cleared immediately." Scotti began the task of organizing all his work to pass on to his successor. It would probably be young Imbralius who would take most of it on, which was as it should be, he considered philosophically. The lad knew how to find business. Scotti wondered idly what the fellow would do with the contracts for the new statue of St. Alessia for which the Temple of the One had applied. Probably invent a clerical error, blame it on his old predecessor Decimus Scotti, and require an additional cost to rectify. "I have correspondence for Decimus Scotti of the Atreus Building Commission." Scotti looked up. A fat-faced courier had entered his office and was thrusting forth a sealed scroll. He handed the boy a gold piece and opened it up. By the poor penmanship, atrocious spelling and grammar, and overall unprofessional tone, it was manifestly evident who the writer was. Leodes Juris, a fellow clerk some years before, who had left the commission after being accused of unethical business practices. "Dear Scotti, I imagine you always wondered what happened to me, and the last place you would have expected to find me is out in the woods. But that's exactly where I am. Ha ha. If you're smart and want to make a lot of extra gold for Lord Atreus, and yourself, ha ha, you'll come down to Valenwood too. If you haven't or have been following the politics here lately, you may or may not know that there's been a war between the Bosmer and their neighbors elsewhere over the last 2 years. Things have only just calmed down, and there's a lot that needs to be rebuilt. Now, I've got more business than I can handle, but I need someone with some clout, someone representing a respected agency to get the quill and the ink. That someone is you, my fiend. Come and meet me at the Mather Pascos Tavern in Falinesti, Valenwood. I'll be here 2 weeks, and you won't be sorry. Juris. P.S. Bring a wagon load of timber if you can." "What do you have there, Scotti?" asked a voice. Scotti started. It was Imbralius, his damnably handsome face peeking through the shutters, smiling in that way that melted the hearts of the stingiest of patrons and the roughest of stonemasons. Scotti shoved the letter in his jacket pocket. "Personal correspondence," he sniffed. "I'll be cleared up here in just a moment." "I don't want to hurry you," said Imbralius, grabbing a few sheets of blank contracts from Scotti's desk. "I've just gone through a stack, and the junior scribe's hands are all cramping up, so I thought you wouldn't miss a few." The lad vanished. Scotti retrieved the letter and read it again. He thought about his life, something he rarely did. It seemed a sea of gray with a black insurmountable wall looming. There was only one narrow passage he could see in that wall. Quickly, before he had a moment to reconsider it, he grabbed a dozen of the blank contracts with the shimmering gold leaf, Atreus Building Commission by appointment of His Imperial Majesty, and hid them in the satchel with his personal effects. The next day, he began his adventure with a giddy lack of hesitation. He arranged for a seat in a caravan bound for Valenwood, the single escorted conveyance to the southeast, leaving the Imperial City that week. He scarcely had hours to pack, but he remembered to purchase a wagon load of timber. It'll be extra gold to pay for a horse to pull that, frowned the convoy head. So I anticipated, smiled Scotty with his best imbroglious grin. 10 wagons in all set off that afternoon through the familiar Cyrodiilic countryside, past fields of wildflowers, gently rolling woodlands, friendly hamlets. The clop of the horses' hooves against the sound stone road reminded Scotty that the Atreus Building Commission constructed it. 5 of the 18 necessary contracts for its completion were drafted by his own hand. "Very smart of you to bring that wood along," said a gray-whiskered Breton man next to him on his wagon. "You must be in commerce." "Of a sort," said Scotty, in a way he hoped was mysterious, before introducing himself. "Decimus Scotty." "Griff Mallon," said the man. "I'm a poet, actually a translator of old Bosmer literature. I was researching some newly discovered tracks of the Noriad Play Bar 2 years ago when the war broke out and I had to leave. You are no doubt familiar with the Noriad, if you're aware of the Green Pact." Scotty thought the man might be speaking perfect gibberish, but he nodded his head. "Naturally, I don't pretend that the Noriad is as renowned as the Me Elidion, or as ancient as the Dansir Gaul, but I think it has a remarkable significance to understanding the nature of the Merolithic Bosmer mind, the origin of the Wood Elf aversion to cutting their own wood or eating any plant material at all. Yet paradoxically, their willingness to import plant stuff from other cultures, I feel, can be linked to a passage in the Noriad." Mallon shuffled through some of his papers, searching for the appropriate text. To Scotty's vast relief, the carriage soon stopped to camp for the night. They were high on a bluff over a gray stream, and before them was the great valley of Valenwood. Only the cry of seabirds declared the presence of the ocean to the bay to the west. Here, the timber was so tall and wide, twisting around itself like an impossible knot begun eons ago, to be impenetrable. A few more modest trees, only 50 feet to the lowest branches, stood on the cliff at the edge of camp. The sight was so alien to Scotty, and he found himself so anxious about the proposition of entering the wilderness that he could not imagine sleeping. Fortunately, Mallon had supposed he had found another academic with a passion for the riddles of ancient cultures. Long into the night, he recited Bosmer verse in the original and in his own translation, sobbing and bellowing and whispering wherever appropriate. Gradually, Scotty began to feel drowsy, but a sudden crack of wood snapping made him sit straight up. "What was that?" Mallon smiled. "I like it too. Convocation in the malignity of the moonless speculum, a dance of fire." "There are some enormous birds up in the trees moving around," whispered Scotty, pointing in the direction of the dark shapes above. "I wouldn't worry about that," said Mallon, irritated with his audience. "Now listen to how the poet characterizes Hermamora's invocation in the 18th stanza of the 4th book." The dark shapes in the trees were some of them perched like birds, others slithered like snakes, and still others stood up straight like men. As Mallon recited his verse, Scotty watched the figures softly leap from branch to branch, half gliding across impossible distances for anything without wings. They gathered in groups, and then reorganized until they had spread to every tree around the camp. Suddenly, they plummeted from the heights. "Mara!" cried Scotty. "They're falling like rain!" "Probably seed pods," Mallon shrugged, not turning around. "Some of the trees have remarkable—" The camp erupted into chaos. Fires burst out in the wagons, the horses wailed from mortal blows, casks of wine, fresh water, and liquor gushed their contents to the ground. A nimble shadow dashed past Scotty and Mallon, gathering sacks of grain and gold with impossible agility and grace. Scotty had only one glance at it, lit up by a sudden nearby burst of flame. It was a sleek creature with pointed ears, wide yellow eyes, mottled pied fur, and a tail like a whip. "Werewolf," he whimpered, shrinking back. "Cathay rot," groaned Mallon. "Much worse. Khajiit cousins or some such thing, come to plunder." "Are you sure?" As quickly as they struck, the creatures retreated, diving off the bluff before the battle mage and knight, the caravan's escorts, had fully opened their eyes. Mallon and Scotty ran to the precipice and saw 100 feet below the tiny figures dash out of the water, shake themselves, and disappear into the wood. "Werewolves aren't acrobats like that," said Mallon. "They were definitely Cathay rot. Bastard thieves. Thanks Stendar they didn't realize the value of my notebooks. It wasn't a complete loss." Volume 2. It was a complete loss. The Cathay Rot had stolen or destroyed almost every item of value in the caravan in just a few minutes' time. Decimus Scotty's wagon load of wood he had hoped to trade with the Bosmer had been set on fire and then toppled off the bluff. His clothing and contracts were tattered and ground into the mud of dirt mixed with spilt wine. All the pilgrims, merchants, and adventurers in the group moaned and wept as they gathered the remnants of their belongings by the rising sun of the dawn.
I best not tell anyone that I managed to hold on to my notes for my translation of the Noriad play bar,
whispered the poet, Griff Malin.
They'd probably turn on me.
Scotty politely declined the opportunity of telling Malin just how little value he himself placed on the man's property. Instead, he counted the coins in his purse. 34 gold pieces. Very little indeed for an entrepreneur beginning a new business. "Hoy!" came a cry from the wood. A small party of Bosmer emerged from the thicket, clad in leather mail and bearing arms. Friend or foe? "Neither," growled the convoy head. "You must be the Cyrodiils," laughed the leader of the group, a tall, skeleton-thin youth with a sharp, vulpine face. "We heard you were en route. Evidently, so did our enemies." "I thought the war was over," muttered one of the caravan's now ruined merchants. The Bosmer laughed again. "No act of war. Just a little border enterprise. You are going on to Valenwood." "I'm not." The convoy shook his head. "As far as I'm concerned, my duty is done. No more horses, no more caravan. Just a fat profit loss to me." The men and women crowded around the man, protesting, threatening, begging, but he refused to step foot in Valenwood. If these were the new times of peace, he said, he'd rather come back for the next war. Scotty tried a different route and approached the Bosmer. He spoke with an authoritative but friendly voice, the kind he used in negotiations with peevish carpenters. "I don't suppose you'd consider escorting me to Valenwood. I'm a representative for an important Imperial agency, the Atreus Building Commission, here to help repair and alleviate some of the problems the war with the Khajiit brought to your province. Patriotism, 20 gold pieces, and you must carry your own gear if you have any left," replied the Bosmer. Scotty reflected that negotiations with peevish carpenters rarely went his way either. 6 eager people had enough gold on them for payment. Among those without funds was the poet, who appealed to Scotty for assistance. "I'm sorry, Griff. I only have 14 gold left over. Not even enough for a decent room when I get to Valenwood. I really would help you if I could," said Scotty, persuading himself that it was true. The band of 6 and their Bosmer escorts began the descent down a rocky path along the bluff. Within an hour's time, they were deep in the jungles of Valenwood. A never-ending canopy of hues of browns and greens obscured the sky. A millennia's worth of fallen leaves formed a deep, wormy sea of putrefaction beneath their feet. Several miles were crossed wading through the slime. For several more, they took a labyrinthian path across fallen branches and the low-hanging boughs of giant trees. All the while, hour after hour, the inexhaustible Bosmer host moved so fast, the Cyrodiils struggled to keep from being left behind. A red-faced little merchant with short legs took a bad step on a rotten branch and nearly fell. His fellow provincials had to help him up. The Bosmer paused only a moment, their eyes continually darting to the shadows in the trees above before moving on at their usual expeditious pace. "What are they so nervous about?" wheezed the merchant irritably. "More cafe rot?" "Don't be ridiculous," laughed the Bosmer unconvincingly. "Khajiit this far into Valenwood? In times of peace? They'd never dare." When the group passed high enough above the swamp that the smell was somewhat dissipated, Scotty felt a sudden pang of hunger. He was used to 4 meals a day in the Cyrodiilic custom. Hours of non-stop exertion without food was not part of his regimen as a comfortably paid clerk. He pondered, feeling somewhat delirious, how long they had been trotting through the jungle. 12 hours? 20? A week? Time was meaningless. Sunlight was only sporadic through the vegetative ceiling. Phosphorescent molds on the trees and in the muck below provided the only regular illumination. "Is it possible at all for us to rest and eat?" he hollered to his host up ahead. "We're near to Valenwood," came the echoing reply. "Lots of food there." The path continued upward for several hours more across a clot of fallen logs, rising up to the first and then the second boughs of the tree line. As they rounded a long corner, the travelers found themselves midway up a waterfall that fell 100 feet or more. No one had the energy to complain as they began pulling up the stacks of rock, agonizing foot by foot. The Bosmer escorts disappeared into the mist, but Scotty kept climbing until there was no more rock left. He wiped the sweat and river water from his eyes. Valenwood spread across the horizon before him. Sprawling across both banks of the river stood the mighty Grot Oak City, with groves and orchards of lesser trees crowding it like supplicants before their king. At a lesser scale, the tree that formed the moving city would have been extraordinary, gnarled and twisted with a gorgeous crown of gold and green, dripping with vines and shining with sap. At a mile tall and half as wide, it was the most magnificent thing Scotty had ever seen. If he had not been a starving man with the soul of a clerk, he would have sung. "There you are," said the leader of the escorts. "Not too far a walk. You should be glad it's wintertide. In summertide, the city's on the far south end of the province." Scotty was lost as to how to proceed. The sight of the vertical metropolis where people moved about like ants disoriented all his sensibilities. "You wouldn't know of an inn called..." He paused for a moment, and then pulled Juris's letter from his pocket. "Something like Mother Pasco's Tavern? Mother Pascost?" The lead Bosmer laughed his familiar contemptuous laugh. "You won't want to stay there. Visitors always prefer the Asia Hall in the top bows. It's expensive, but very nice. I'm meeting someone at Mother Pascost's Tavern. If you've made up your mind to go, take a lift to Havel Slump and ask for directions there. Just don't get lost and fall asleep in the Western Cross." This apparently struck the youth's friends as a very witty jest, and so it was with their laughter echoing behind him that Scotty crossed the writhing root system to the base of Valenwood. The ground was littered with leaves and refuse, and from moment to moment a glass or a bone would plummet from far above, so he walked with his neck crooked to have warning. An intricate network of platforms anchored to thick vines slipped up and down the slick trunk of the city with perfect grace, manned by operators with arms as thick as an ox's belly. Scotty approached the nearest fellow at one of the platforms, who was idly smoking from a glass pipe. "I was wondering if you might take me to Havel Slump." The Mer nodded, and within a few minutes' time, Scotty was 200 feet in the air at a crook between two mighty branches. Curled webs of moss stretched unevenly across the fork, forming a sharing roof for several dozen small buildings. There were only a few souls in the alley, but around the bend ahead, he could hear the sound of music and people. Scotty tipped the Valenwood platform ferryman a gold piece and asked for the location of Mother Pascost's Tavern. "Straight ahead of you, sir, but you won't find anyone there," the ferryman explained, pointing in the direction of the noise. "Morndas, everyone in Havel Slump has revelry." Scotty walked carefully along the narrow street. Though the ground felt as solid as the marble avenues of the Imperial city, there were slick cracks in the bark that exposed fatal drops into the river. He took a moment to sit down, to rest, and get used to the view from the heights. It was a beautiful day for certain, but it took Scotty only a few minutes of contemplation to rise up in alarm. A jolly little raft anchored downstream below him had distinctly moved several inches while he watched it. But it hadn't moved at all. He had. Together with everything around him, it was no metaphor. The city of Valenwood walked, and considering its size, it moved quickly. Scotty rose to his feet and into a cloud of smoke that drifted out from around the bend. It was the most delicious roast he had ever smelled. The clerk forgot his fear and ran. The revelry, as the ferryman had termed it, took place on an enormous platform tied to the tree, wide enough to be a plaza in any other city. A fantastic assortment of the most amazing people Scotty had ever seen were jammed shoulder to shoulder together, many eating, many more drinking, and some dancing to a lutist and a singer perched on an offshoot above the crowd. There were largely Bosmer, true natives clad in colorful leather and bones, with a close minority of orcs. Whirling through the throng, dancing and bellowing at one another were a hideous ape people. A few heads bobbing over the tops of the crowd belonged not, as Scotty first assumed, to a very tall people, but to a family of centaurs. "Care for some mutton?" queried a wizened old Mer, who roasted an enormous beast on some red-hot rocks. Scotty quickly paid him a gold piece and devoured the leg he was given, and then another gold piece and another leg. The fellow chuckled when Scotty began choking on a piece of gristle and handed him a mug of a frothing white drink. He drank it and felt a quiver run through his body as if he were being tickled. "What is that?" Scotty asked. "Jaga. Fermented pig's milk. I can let you have a flagon of it and a bit more mutton for another gold." Scotty agreed, paid, gobbled down the meat, and took the flagon with him as he slipped into the crowd. His co-worker, Leides Juris, the man who had told him to come to Valenwood, was nowhere to be seen. When the flagon was a quarter empty, Scotty stopped looking for Juris. When it was half empty, he was dancing with the group, oblivious to the broken planks and gaps in the fencework. At 3/4 empty, he was trading jokes with a group of creatures whose language was completely alien to him. By the time the flagon was completely drained, he was asleep, snoring, while the revelry continued all around his supine body. The next morning, still asleep, Scotty had the sensation of someone kissing him. He made a face to return the favor, but a pain like fire spread through his chest and forced him to open his eyes. There was an insect the size of a large calf sitting on him, crushing him, its spiky legs holding him down while a central spiral-bladed vortex of a mouth tore through his shirt. He screamed and thrashed, but the beast was too strong. It had found its meal, and it was going to finish it. It's over, thought Scotty wildly. I should have never left home. I should have stayed in the city and perhaps found work with Lord Vanek. I could have begun again as a junior clerk and worked my way back up. Suddenly, the mouth released itself. The creature shivered once, expelled a burst of yellow bile, and died. "Got one!" cried a voice, not too distantly. For a moment, Scotty lay still. His head throbbed and his chest burned. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. Another of the horrible monsters was scurried towards him. He scrambled, trying to push himself free, but before he could come out, there was a sound of a bow cracking and an arrow pierced the second insect. "Good shot!" cried another voice. "Get the first one again, I just saw it move a little." This time, Scotty felt the impact of the bolt hit the carcass. He cried out, but he could hear how muffled his voice was by the beetle's body. Cautiously, he tried sliding a foot out and rolling under, but the movement apparently had the effect of convincing the archers that the creature still lived. A volley of arrows was launched forth. Now the beast was sufficiently perforated so pools of its blood, and likely the blood of its victims, began to seep out onto Scotty's body. When Scotty was a lad, before he grew too sophisticated for such sports, he had often gone to the Imperial arena for the competitions of war. He recalled a great veteran of the fights, when asked, telling him his secret. "Whenever I'm in doubt of what to do, and I have a shield, I stay behind it." Scotty followed that advice. After an hour, when he no longer heard arrows being fired, he threw aside the remains of the bug and leapt as quickly as he could to a stand. It was not a moment too soon. A gang of 8 archers had their bows pointing in his direction, ready to fire. When they saw him, they laughed. "Didn't anyone ever tell you not to sleep in the Western Cross? How are we going to exterminate all the horrivores if you drunks keep feeding them?" Scotty shook his head and walked back along the platform, round the bend, to Havel's slump. He was bloodied and torn and tired, and he had far too much fermented pig's milk. All he wanted was a proper place to lie down. He stepped into Mother Pascau's tavern, a dank place, wet with sap, smelling of mildew. "My name is Decimus Scotty," he said. "I was hoping you would have someone named Juris staying here." "Decimus Scotty?" pondered the fleshy proprietress, Mother Pascaust herself. "I've heard that name. Oh, you must be the fellow he left the note for. Let me go see if I can find it." Volume 3. Mother Pascauste disappeared into the sordid hole that was her tavern, and emerged a moment later with a scrap of paper with Leides Juris's familiar scrawl. Decimus Scotty held it up before a patch of sunlight that had found its way through the massive boughs of the Tree City, and read, "Scotty, so you made it to Falinasti Valenwood. Congratulations. I'm sure you had quite a adventure getting here. Unfortunately, I'm not here anymore, as you probably guess. There's a town downriver called Athi I'm at. Get a boat and join me. It's ideal. I hope you brought a lot of contracts, cause these people need a lot of building done. They were close to the war, you see, but not so close they don't have any money left to pay. Haha. Meet me down here as soon as you can. Juris." So, Scotty pondered, Juris had left Falinesti and gone to some place called Athi. Given his poor penmanship and ghastly spelling, it could equally well be Athi, Affy, O3, M3, Eartha, or Crackamaca. The sensible thing to do, Scotty knew, was to call this adventure over and try to find some way to get back home to the Imperial City. He was no mercenary devoted to a life of thrills. He was, or at least had been, a senior clerk at a successful private building commission. Over the last few weeks, he had been robbed by the Cathay Rot, taken on a death march through the jungle by a gang of giggling Bosmeri, half starved to death, drugged with fermented pig's milk, nearly slain by some kind of giant tick, and attacked by archers. He was filthy, exhausted, and had, he counted, 10 gold pieces to his name. Now the man whose proposal brought him to the depths of misery was not even there. It was both judicious and seemly to abandon the enterprise entirely. And yet a small but distinct voice in his head told him, "You have been chosen. You have no other choice but to see this through." Scotty turned to the stout old woman, Mother Pascost, who had been watching him curiously. I was wondering if you knew of a village that was at the edge of the recent conflict with Elsewhere. It's called something like Athe? You must mean Athe, she grinned. My middle lad, Viglil, he manages a dairy down there. Beautiful country, right on the river. Is that where your friend went? Yes, said Scotty. Do you know the fastest way to get there? After a short conversation, an even shorter ride to Falinesti's roots by the way of the platforms, and a jog to the riverbank, Scotty was negotiating transport with a huge, fair-haired Bosmer with a face like a pickled carp. He called himself Captain Balfix, but even Scotty with his sheltered life could recognize him for what he was. A retired pirate for hire, a smuggler for certain, and probably much worse. His ship, which had clearly been stolen in the distant past, was a bent old Imperial sloop. 50 gold and we'll be in Athe in 2 days' time, boomed Captain Balfix expansively. I have 9 gold pieces, replied Scotty, and feeling the need for explanation added, I had 10, but I gave one to the platform ferryman to get me down here. 9 is just as fine, said the captain agreeably. Truth be told, I was going to Athe whether you paid me or not. Make yourself comfortable on the boat. We'll be leaving in just a few minutes. Decimus Scotty boarded the vessel, which sat low in the water of the river, stacked high with crates and sacks that spilled out of the hold and galley onto the deck. Each was marked with stamps advertising the most innocuous substances: copper scraps, lard, ink, high rock meal, marked for cattle, tar, fish jelly. Scotty's imagination reeled, picturing what sorts of illicit imports were truly aboard. It took more than those few minutes for Captain Balfix to haul in the rest of his cargo, but in an hour the anchor was up and they were sailing downriver towards Athe. The green-gray water barely rippled, only touched by the fingers of the breeze. Lush plant life crowded the banks, obscuring from sight all the animals that sang and roared at one another. Lulled by the serene surroundings, Scotty drifted to sleep. At night, he awoke and gracefully accepted some clean clothes and food from Captain Balfix. Why are you going to Athe, if I may ask? Queried the Bosmer. I'm meeting a former colleague there. He asked me to come down from the Imperial city where I worked for the Atreus Building Commission to negotiate some contracts. Scotty took another bite of the dried sausages they were sharing for dinner. We're going to try to repair and refurbish whatever bridges, roads, and other structures that got damaged in the recent war with the Khajiit. It's been a hard 2 years. The captain nodded his head. Though I suppose good for me and the likes of you and your friend. Trade routes cut off. Now they think there's going to be war with the Somerset Isles. You heard that? Scotty shook his head. I've done my share of smuggling skooma down the coast, even helping some revolutionary types escape the Maine's wrath. But now the wars have made me a legitimate trader, a businessman. The first casualties of war is always the corrupted. Scotty said he was sorry to hear that, and they lapsed into silence, watching the stars and moon's reflection on the still water. The next day, Scotty awoke to find the captain wrapped up in his sail, torpid from alcohol, singing in a low, slurred voice. When he saw Scotty rise, he offered his flagon of Giaga. I learned my lesson during the revelry at Western Cross. The captain laughed and then burst into tears. I don't want to be legitimate. Other pirates I used to know are still raping and stealing and smuggling and selling nice folk like you into slavery. I swear to you, I never thought the first time that I ran a real shipment of legal goods that my life would turn out like this. Oh, I know I could go back to it, but Bondar knows not after all I've seen. I'm a ruined man. Scotty helped the weeping Mur out of the sail, murmuring words of reassurance. Then he added, Forgive me for changing the subject, but where are we? Oh, moaned Captain Balfix miserably. We made good time. Athe's right around the bend in the river. Then it looks like Athe's on fire, said Scotty, pointing. A great plume of smoke, black as pitch, was rising above the trees. As they drifted around the bend, they next saw the flames, and then the blackened skeletal remains of the village. Dying, blazing villagers leapt from rocks into the river. A cacophony of wailing met their ears, and they could see, roaming along the edges of the town, the figures of Khajiit soldiers bearing torches. Bondar blash me, slurred the captain. The war's back on. Oh no, whimpered Scotty. The sloop drifted with the current toward the opposite shore away from the fiery town. Scotty turned his attention there and the sanctuary it offered. Just a peaceful arbor away from the horror. There was a shudder of leaves in 2 of the trees, and a dozen lithe Khajiit dropped to the ground, armed with bows. They see us, hissed Scotty, and they've got bows. Well, of course they have bows, snarled Captain Balfix.
We Bosmer may have invented the bloody things, but we didn't think to keep them secret, you bloody bureaucrat. Now they're setting their arrows on fire. Yes, they do that sometimes. Captain, they're shooting at us. They're shooting at us with flaming arrows.
Ah, so they are, the captain agreed. The aim here is to avoid being hit. But hit they were, and very shortly thereafter. Even worse, the second volley of arrows hit the supply of pitch, which ignited in a tremendous blue blaze. Scotty grabbed Captain Balfix and they leapt overboard just before the ship and all its cargo disintegrated. The shock of the cold water brought the Bosmer into temporary sobriety. He called to Scotty, who was already swimming as fast as he could toward the bend.
Master Decimus, where do you think you're swimming to?
Back to Falinesti, cried Scotty.
It will take you days, and by the time you get there, everyone will know about the attack on Athe. They'll never let anyone they don't know in. The closest village downriver is Grenos. Maybe they'll give us shelter.
Scotty swam back to the captain, and side by side they began paddling in the middle of the river, past the burning residuum of the village. He thanked Mara that he had learned to swim. Many a Cyrodiil did not, as largely landlocked as the Imperial province was. Had he been raised in Mir Korup or Artemon, he might have been doomed. But the Imperial city itself was encircled by water, and every lad and lass there knew how to cross without a boat. Even those who grew up to be clerks and not adventurers. Captain Balfix's sobriety faded as he grew used to the water's temperature. Even in wintertide, the Xylo River was fairly temperate and after a fashion, even comfortable. The Bosmer's strokes were uneven, and he'd stray closer to Scotty and then further away, pushing ahead and then falling behind. Scotty looked to the shore to his right. The flames had caught the trees like tinder. Behind them was an inferno, with which they were barely keeping pace. To the shore on their left, all looked fair until he saw a tremble in the river reeds, and then what caused it. A pride of the largest cats he had ever seen. They were auburn-haired, green-eyed beasts with jaws and teeth to match his wildest nightmares. And they were watching the two swimmers, and keeping pace.
Captain Balfix, we can't go to either that shore or the other one, or we'll be parboiled and eaten, Scotty whispered. Try to even your kicking and your strokes. Breathe like you would normally. If you're feeling tired, tell me, and we'll float on our backs for a while.
Anyone who had the experience of giving rational advice to a drunkard would understand the hopelessness. Scotty kept pace with the captain, slowing himself, quickening, drifting left and right, while the Bosmer moaned old ditties from his pirate days. When he wasn't watching his companion, he watched the cats on the shore. After a stretch, he turned to his right. Another village had caught fire. Undoubtedly, it was Grenos. Scotty stared at the blazing fury, awed by the sight of the destruction, and did not hear that the captain had ceased to sing. When he turned back, Captain Balfix was gone. Scotty dove into the murky depths of the river over and over again. There was nothing to be done. When he surfaced after his final search, he saw that the giant cats had moved on, perhaps assuming that he too had drowned. He continued his lonely swim downriver. A tributary, he noted, had formed a final barrier, keeping the flames from spreading further. But there were no more towns. After several hours, he began to ponder the wisdom of going ashore. Which shore was the question. He was spared the decision. Ahead of him was a rocky island with a bonfire. He did not know if he were intruding on a party of Bosmeri or Khajiiti, only that he could swim no more. With straining, aching muscles, he pulled himself onto the rocks. They were Bosmer refugees, he gathered, even before they told him. Roasting over the fire was the remains of one of the giant cats that had been stalking him through the jungle on the opposite shore. "Sench tiger," said one of the young warriors ravenously. "It's no animal. It's as smart as any Cathay Rot or Ohms or any other bleeding Khajiiti. Pity this one drowned. I would have gladly killed it. You'll like the meat, though. Sweet, from all the sugar these asses eat." Scotty did not know if he was capable of eating a creature as intelligent as a man or mer, but he surprised himself, as he had done several times over the last days. It was rich, succulent, and sweet, like sugared pork, but no seasonings had been added. He surveyed the crowd as he ate. A sad lot, some still weeping for lost family members. They were the survivors of both the villages of Grenos and Athe, and war was on every person's lips. Why had the Khajiiti attacked again? Why, specifically directed at Scotty, as a Cyrodiil, was the Emperor not enforcing peace in his provinces? "I was to meet another Cyrodiil," he said to a Bosmer maiden who he understood to be from Athe. His name was Leides Juris. "I don't suppose you know what might have happened to him." "I don't know your friend, but there were many Cyrodiils in Athe when the fire came," said the girl. "Some of them, I think, left quickly. They were going to Vindisi, inland, in the jungle. I'm going there tomorrow. So are many of us.
If you wish, you may come as well.
Decimus Scotty nodded solemnly.
He made himself as comfortable as he could in the stony ground of the river island, and somehow, after much effort, he fell asleep. But he did not sleep well. Volume 4. 18 Bosmeri and one Cyrodiilic former senior clerk for an Imperial building commission trudged through the jungle westward from the Xylo River to the ancient village of Vendisi. For Decimus Scotty, the jungle was hostile, unfamiliar ground. The enormous, vermiculated trees filled the bright morning with darkness and resembled nothing so much as grasping claws, bent on impeding their progress. Even the fronds of the low plants quivered with malevolent energy. What was worse, he was not alone in his anxiety. His fellow travelers, the natives who had survived the Khajiit attacks on the village of Grenos and Athe, wore faces of undisguised fear. There was something sentient in the jungle, and not merely the mad but benevolent indigenous spirits. In his peripheral vision, Scotty could see the shadows of the Khajiit following the refugees, leaping from tree to tree. When he turned to face them, the lithe forms vanished into the gloom as if they had never been there. But he knew he had seen them, and the Bosmeri saw them too and quickened their pace. After 18 hours, bitten raw by insects, scratched by 1,000 thorns, they emerged into a valley clearing. It was night, but a row of blazing torches greeted them, illuminating the leather-wrought tents and jumbled stones of the hamlet of Vendisi. At the end of the valley, the torches marked a sacred site, a gnarled bower of trees pressed close together to form a temple. Wordlessly, the Bosmeri walked the torch arcade toward the trees. Scotty followed them. When they reached the solid mass of living wood with only one gaping portal, Scotty could see a dim blue light glowing within. A low, sonorous moan from 100 voices echoed within. The Bosmeri maiden he had been following held out her hand, stopping him. "You do not understand, but no outsider, not even a friend, may enter," she said. "This is a holy place." Scotty nodded and watched the refugees march back into the temple, heads bowed. Their voices joined with the ones within. When the last wood elf had gone inside, Scotty turned his attention back to the village. There must be food to be had somewhere. A tendril of smoke and a faint whiff of roasting venison beyond the torchlight led him. They were 5 Cyrodiils, 2 Bretons, and a Nord. The group gathered around a campfire of glowing white stones, pulling steaming strips of meat from the cadaver of a great stag. At Scotty's approach, they rose up, all but the Nord who was distracted by his hunk of animal flesh. "Good evening. Sorry to interrupt, but I was wondering if I might have a little something to eat. I'm afraid I'm rather hungry, after walking all day with some refugees from Grenos and Athe." They bade him to sit down and eat, and introduce themselves. "So the war's back on, it seems," said Scotty amiably. "Best thing for these effete do-nothings," replied the Nord in between bites. "I've never seen such a lazy culture. Now they've got the Khajiit striking them on land and the High Elves at sea. If there's any province that deserves a little distress, it's damnable Valenwood." "I don't see how they're so offensive to you," laughed one of the Bretons. "They're congenital thieves, even worse than the Khajiit, because they are so blessed meek in their aggression." The Nord spat out a gob of fat, which sizzled on the hot stones of the fire. "They spread their forests into territory that doesn't belong to them, slowly infiltrating their neighbors, and they're puzzled when elsewhere shoves back at them. They're all villains of the worst order." "What are you doing here?" asked Scotty. "I'm a diplomat from the court of Gehenna," muttered the Nord, returning to his food. "What about you? What are you doing here?" asked one of the Cyrodiils. "I work for Lord Atreus's building commission in the Imperial city," said Scotty. "One of my former colleagues suggested I come down to Valenwood. He said the war was over and I could contract a great deal of business for my firm rebuilding what was lost. One disaster after another, and I've lost all my money. I'm in the middle of a rekindling of war, and I cannot find my former colleague." "Your former colleague," murmured another of the Cyrodiils, who had introduced himself as Reglius. "He wasn't by any chance named Leiades Juris, was he? You know him?" "He lured me down to Valenwood in nearly the exact same circumstances," smiled Reglius grimly. "I worked for your employer's competitor, Lord Venek's men, where Leiades Juris also formerly worked. He wrote to me, asking that I represent an Imperial building commission and contract some post-war construction. I had just been released from my employment, and I thought that if I brought some new business, I could have my job back. Juris and I met in Athe, and he said he was going to arrange a very lucrative meeting with the Sylvanar." Scotty was stunned. "Where is he now?"
I'm no theologian, so I couldn't say. Regulus shrugged. He's dead. When the Khajiit attacked Athe, they began by torching the harbor where Juris was readying his boat. Or I should say my boat, since it was purchased with the gold I brought. By the time we were even aware of what was happening enough to flee, everything by the water was ash. The Khajiit may be animals, but they know how to arrange an attack. I think they followed us through the jungle to Vindisi, said Scotty nervously. There was definitely a group of something jumping along the treetops. Probably one of the monkey folk, snorted the Nord. Nothing to be concerned about. When we first came to Vindisi and the Bosmeri all entered that tree, they were furious, whispering something about unleashing an ancient terror on their enemies. The Breton shivered, remembering. They've been there ever since, for over a day and a half now. If you want something to be afraid of, that's the direction to look. The other Breton, who was a representative of the Daggerfall Mages Guild, was staring off into the darkness while his fellow provincial spoke. Maybe, but there's something in the jungle too, right on the edge of the village, looking in. More refugees, maybe? Asked Scotty, trying to keep the alarm out of his voice. Not unless they're traveling through the trees now, whispered the wizard. The Nord and one of the Cyrodiils grabbed a long tarp of wet leather and pulled it across the fire, instantly extinguishing it without so much as a sizzle. Now Scotty could see the intruders, their elliptical yellow eyes and long, cruel blades catching the torchlight. He froze with fear, praying that he too was not so visible to them. He felt something bump against his back and gasped. Regulus's voice hissed from up above. Be quiet for Mara's sake and climb up here. Scotty grabbed a hold of the knotted double vine that hung down from a tall tree at the edge of the dead campfire. He scrambled up it as quickly as he could, holding his breath lest any grunt of exertion escape him. At the top of the vine, high above the village, was an abandoned nest from some great bird in a trident-shaped branch. As soon as Scotty had pulled himself into the soft, fragrant straw, Regulus pulled up the vine. No one else was there, and when Scotty looked down, he could see no one below. No one, that is, except the Khajiit, slowly moving toward the glow of the temple tree. Thank you, whispered Scotty, deeply touched that a competitor had helped him. He turned away from the village and saw that the tree's upper branches brushed against the mossy rock walls that surrounded the valley below. How are you at climbing? You're mad, said Regulus under his breath. We should stay here until they leave. If they burn Vindisi like they did Athe and Grenos, we'll be dead sure as if we were on the ground. Scotty began the slow, careful climb up the tree, testing each branch. Can you see what they're doing? I can't really tell. Regulus stared down into the gloom. They're at the front of the temple. I think they also have... It looks like long ropes trailing off behind them, off into the pass. Scotty crawled onto the strongest branch that pointed toward the wet, rocky face of the cliff. It was not a far jump at all. So close, in fact, that he could smell the moisture and feel the coolness of the stone. But it was a jump nevertheless, and in his history as a clerk, he had never before leapt from a tree 100 feet off the ground to a sheer rock. He pictured in his mind's eye the shadows that had pursued him through the jungle from the heights above. How their legs coiled to spring, how their arms snapped forward in an elegant fluid motion to grasp. He leapt. His hands grappled for rock, but long, thick cords of moss were more accessible. He held hard, but when he tried to plant his feet forward, they slipped up skyward. For a few seconds, he found himself upside down before he managed to pull himself into a more conventional position. There was a narrow outcropping jutting out of the cliff where he could stand and finally exhale. Regulus, Regulus, Regulus. Scotty did not dare to call out. In a minute, there was a shaking of branches, and Lord Venek's man emerged. First his satchel, then his head, then the rest of him. Scotty started to whisper something, but Regulus shook his head violently and pointed downward. One of the Khajiit was at the base of the tree, peering at the remains of the campfire. Regulus awkwardly tried to balance himself on the branch, but as strong as it was exceedingly difficult with only one free hand. Scotty cupped his palms and then pointed at the satchel. It seemed to pain Regulus to let it out of his grasp, but he relented and tossed it to Scotty. There was a small, almost invisible hole in the bag, and when Scotty caught it, a single gold coin dropped out. It rang as it bounced against the rock wall on the descent, a high, soft sound that seemed like the loudest alarm Scotty had ever heard. Then many things happened very quickly. The Cathay rod at the base of the tree looked up and gave a loud wail. The other Khajiit followed in chorus as the cat below crouched down and then sprung up into the lower branches. Regulus saw it below him, climbing with impossible dexterity, and panicked.
Even before he jumped, Scotty could tell that he was going to fall. With a cry, Regulus the clerk plunged to the ground, breaking his neck on impact. A flash of white fire erupted from every crevice of the temple, and the moan of the Bosmeri prayer changed into something terrible and otherworldly. The climbing Cathay Rot stopped and stared. "Virgo," it gasped. "The wild hunt!" It was as if a crack in reality had opened wide. A flood of horrific beasts, tentacled toads, insects of armor and spine, gelatinous serpents, vaporous beings with the face of gods, all poured forth from the great hollow tree, blind with fury. They tore the Khajiit in front of the temple to pieces. All the other cats fled for the jungle, but as they did so, they began pulling on the ropes they carried. In a few seconds' time, the entire village of Vindisi was boiling with the lunatic apparitions of the wild hunt. Over the babbling, barking, howling horde, Scotty heard the Cyrodiils in hiding cry out as they were devoured. The Nord, too, was found and eaten, and both Bretons. The wizard had turned himself invisible, but the swarm did not rely on their sight. The tree the Cathay Rot was in began to sway and rock from the impossible violence beneath it. Scotty looked at the Khajiit's fear-struck eyes and held out one of the cords of moss. The cat's face showed its pitiful gratitude as it leapt for the vine. It didn't have time to entirely replace that expression when Scotty pulled back the cord and watched it fall. The hunt consumed it to the bone before it struck the ground. Scotty's own jump up to the next outcropping of rock was immeasurably more successful. From there, he pulled himself to the top of the cliff and was able to look down into the chaos that had been the village of Vindisi. The hunt's mass had grown and began to spill out through the pass out of the valley, pursuing the fleeing Khajiit. It was then that the madness truly began. In the moon's light, from Scotty's vantage, he could see where the Khajiit had attached their ropes. With a thunderous boom, an avalanche of boulders poured over the pass. When the dust cleared, he saw that the valley had been sealed. The wild hunt had nowhere to turn but on itself. Scotty turned his head, unable to bear to look at the cannibalistic orgy. The night jungle stood before him, a web of wood. He slung Regulus' satchel over his shoulder and entered. Volume 5. "Soap! The forest will eat love! Straight ahead! Stupid and a stupid cow!" The voice boomed out so suddenly that Decimus Scotty jumped. He stared off into the dim jungle glade from which he had only heard animal and insect calls and the low whistling of wind moments before. It was a queer, oddly accented voice of indiscriminate gender, tremulous in its modulations but unmistakably human. Or, at the very least, elven. An isolated Bosmer, perhaps, with a poor grasp of the Cyrodiilic language. After countless hours of plodding through the dense knot of Valenwood jungle, any voice of slight familiarity sounded wondrous. "Hello?" he cried. "Beetles on any names? Certainly yesterday, yes," the voice called back. "Who, what, and when, and mice?" "I'm afraid I don't understand," replied Scotty, turning toward the brambled tree, thick as a wagon, where the voice had issued. "But you needn't be afraid of me. My name is Decimus Scotty. I'm a Cyrodiil from the Imperial city. I came here to help rebuild Valenwood after the war, you see, and now I'm rather lost. Gemstones and grilled slaves. The war," moaned the voice, and broke down into sobs. "You know about the war? I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure even how far away from the border I am now." Scotty began slowly walking toward the tree. He dropped Regulus' satchel to the ground and held out his empty hands. "I'm unarmed. I only want to know the way to the closest town. I'm trying to meet my friend Leides Juris in Sylvanar." "Sylvanar!" the voice laughed. It laughed even louder as Scotty circled the tree. "Worms and wine, worms and wine! Sylvanar sings for worms and wine!" There was nothing to be found anywhere around the tree. "I don't see you. Why are you hiding?" In a frustration born of hunger and exhaustion, he struck the tree trunk. A sudden shiver of gold and red erupted from a hollow nook above, and Scotty was surrounded by 6 winged creatures scarcely more than a few inches long. Bright, crimson eyes were set on either side of tunnel-like protuberances, the animals' always open mouths. They were legless, and their thin, rapidly beating, aureate wings seemed poorly constructed to transport their fat, swollen bellies. And yet, they darted through the air like sparks from a fire. Whirling about the poor clerk, they began chattering what he now understood to be perfect nonsense. "Wines and worms, how far from the border am I? Academic garnishments, and alas, Leides Juris." Hello? I'm afraid I'm unarmed? Smoke and flames in the closest town is dear oblivion. Swollen on bad meat, an indigo nimbus. But you needn't be afraid of me. Why are you hiding? Why are you hiding? Before I begin to friend, love me, Lady Zulika. Furious with the mimics, Scotty swung his arms, driving them up into the treetops. He stomped back to the clearing and opened up the satchel again, as he had done some hours before. There was still, unsurprisingly, nothing useful in the bag, and nothing to eat in any corner or pocket. A goodly amount of gold. He smiled grimly as he had done before, at the irony of being financially solvent in the jungle. A stack of neat blank contracts from Lord Vinek's building commission, some thin cord, and an oiled leather cloak for bad weather. At least, Scotty considered, he had not suffered rain. A rolling moan of thunder reminded Scotty of what he had suspected for some weeks now. He was cursed. Within an hour's time, he was wearing the cloak and clawing his way through mud. The trees, which had earlier allowed no sunlight in, provided no shelter against the pounding storm and wind. The only sounds that pierced the pelting of the rain were the mocking calls of the flying creatures, flitting just above, babbling their nonsense. Scotty bellowed at them, threw rocks, but they seemed enamored of his company. While he was reaching to grab a promising-looking stone to hurl at his tormentors, Scotty felt something shift beneath his feet. Wet but solid ground suddenly liquefied and became a rolling tide, rushing him forward. Light as a leaf, he flew head over feet overhead until the mud flow dropped and he continued forward, plunging down into a river 25 feet below. The storm passed quite as instantly as it had arrived. The sun melted the dark clouds and warmed Scotty as he swam for the shore. There, another sign of the Khajiit incursion into Valenwood greeted him. A small fishing village had stood there once, so recently extinct that it smoldered like a still warm corpse. Dirt cairns that had once housed fish by the smell of them had been ravaged, their bounty turned to ash. Rafts and skiffs lay broken, scuttled, half submerged. All the villagers were no more, either dead or refugees far away. Or so he presumed. Something banged against the wall of one of the ruins. Scotty ran to investigate. "My name is Decimus Scotty," sang the first winged beast. "I'm a Cyrodiil from the Imperial city. I came here to help rebuild Valenwood after the war, you see, and now I'm rather lost." "I swell to maculate, Ape Neck," agreed one of its companions. "I don't see you. Why are you hiding?" As they fell into chattering, Scotty began to search the rest of the village. Surely the cats had left something behind. A scrap of dried meat, a morsel of fish sausage, anything. But they had been immaculate in their complete annihilation. There was nothing to eat anywhere. Scotty did find one item of possible use under the tumbled remains of a stone hut. A bow and 2 arrows made of bone. The string had been lost, likely burned away in the heat of the fire, but he pulled the cord from Regulus's satchel and restrung it. The creatures flew over and hovered nearby as he worked. "The convent of the sacred Leides Juris? You know about the war, worms and wine, circumscribe a golden host, Ape Neck." The moment the cord was taut, Scotty knocked an arrow and swung around, pulling the string tight against his chest. The winged beast, having had experience with archers before, shot off in all directions in a blur. They needn't have bothered. Scotty's first arrow dove into the ground 3 feet in front of him. He swore and retrieved it. The mimics, having likewise had experience with poor archers before, returned at once to hovering nearby and mocking Scotty. On his second shot, Scotty did much better, in purely technical terms. He remembered how the archers in Falinesti looked when he pulled himself out from under the Horvor tick, and they were all taking aim at him. He extended his left hand, and right elbow in a symmetrical line, drawing the bow so his hand touched his jawline, and he could see the creature in his sight like the arrow was a finger he was pointing with. The bolt missed the target by only 2 feet, but it continued on its trajectory, snapping when it struck a rock wall. Scotty walked to the river's edge. He had only 1 arrow left, and perhaps he considered it would be most practical to find a slow-moving fish and fire it on that. If he missed, at least there was less chance of a breaking of the shaft, and he could always retrieve it from the water. A rather torpid, whiskered fish rolled by, and he took aim at it. "My name is Decimus Scotty!" One of the creatures howled, frightening the fish away. Stupid and a stupid cow, will you dance a dance in fire? Scotty turned and aimed the arrow as he had done before. This time, however, he remembered to plant his feet as the archers had done, 7 inches apart, knees straight, left leg slightly forward to meet the angle of his right shoulder. He released the last arrow. The arrow also proved a serviceable prong for roasting the creature against the smoking hot stones of one of the ruins. Its other companions had disappeared instantly after the beast was slain, and Scotty was able to dine in peace. The meat proved to be delicious, if scarcely more than a first course. He was picking the last of it from the bones when a boat sailed into view from around the bend of the river. At the helm were Bosmer sailors. Scotty ran to the bank and waved his arms. They averted their eyes and continued past. "You bloody cowless bastards!" Scotty howled. "Knaves, hooligans, ape-necks, scoundrels!" A gray-whiskered form came out from a hatch, and Scotty immediately recognized him as Griff Malin, the poet-translator he had met in the caravan from Cyrodiil. He peered Scotty's direction, and his eyes lit up with delight. "Decimus Scotty, precisely the man I hoped to see. I want to get your thoughts on a rather puzzling passage in the Noriad play bar. It begins with, 'I went weeping into the world searching for wonders.' Perhaps you're familiar with it?" "I'd like nothing better than to discuss the Noriad play bar with you, Griff," Scotty called back. "Would you let me come aboard, though, first?" Overjoyed at being on a ship bound for any port at all, Scotty was true to his word. For over an hour as the boat rolled down the river past the blackened remnants of Bosmeri villages, he asked no questions and spoke nothing of his life over the past weeks. He merely listened to Malin's theories of Morethic Aldmeri esoterica. The translator was undemanding of his guest's scholarship, accepting nods and shrugs as civilized conversation. He even produced some wine and fish jelly, which he shared with Scotty absent-mindedly, as he expounded on his various theses. Finally, while Malin was searching for a reference to some minor point in his notes, Scotty asked, rather off subject, but I was wondering where we're bound. "The very heart of the province, Sylvanar," Malin said, not looking up from the passage he was reading. "It's somewhat bothersome, actually, as I wanted to go to Woodhearth first to talk to a Bosmer there who claims to have an original copy of Dirith Yalmiliad, if you can believe it. But for the time being, that has to wait. Somerset Isle has surrounded the city and is in the process of starving the citizenry until they surrender. It's a tiresome prospect since the Bosmeri are happy to eat one another, so there's a risk that at the end only one fat wood elf will remain to wave the flag." "That is vexing," agreed Scotty sympathetically. "To the east, the Khajiit are burning everything, and to the west, the High Elves are waging war. I don't suppose the borders to the north are clear." "They're even worse," replied Malin, finger on the page, still distracted. "The Cyrodiils and Redguards don't want Bosmer refugees streaming into their provinces. It only stands to reason. Imagine how much more criminally inclined they'd be now that they're homeless and hungry." "So," murmured Scotty, feeling a shiver, "we're trapped in Valenwood." "Not at all. I need to leave fairly shortly myself, as my publisher has set a very definite deadline for my new book of translations. From what I understand, one merely petitions to the Sylvanar for special border protection, and one can cross into Cyrodiil with impunity." "Petition the Sylvanar or petition at Sylvanar?" "Petition the Sylvanar at Sylvanar. It's an odd nomenclature that is typical of this place, the sort of thing that makes my job as a translator that much more challenging. The Sylvanar, he, or rather they, are the closest the Bosmeri have to a great leader. The essential thing to remember about the Sylvanar—" Malin smiled, finding the passage he was looking for. "Here, a fortnight, inexplicable, the world burns into a dance. There's that metaphor again." "What are you saying about the Sylvanar?" asked Scotty. "The essential thing to remember?" "I don't remember what I was saying," replied Malin, turning back to his oration. In a week's time, the little boat bumped along the shallow, calmer waters of the foaming current the Xylo had become, and Decimus Scotty first saw the city of Sylvanar. If Falinesti was a tree, then Sylvanar was a flower. A magnificent pile of faded shades of green, red, blue, and white, shining with crystalline residue. Malin had mentioned offhand, when not otherwise explaining Aldmeri prosody, that Sylvanar had once been a blossoming glade in the forest, but owing to some spell or natural cause, the tree's sap began flowing with translucent liqueur. The process of the sap flowing and hardening over the colorful trees had formed the web of the city. Malon's description was intriguing, but it hardly prepared him for the city's beauty. "What is the finest, most luxurious tavern here?" Scotty asked one of the Bosmer boatmen. "Prathala Hall," Malon answered. "But why don't you stay with me? I'm visiting an acquaintance of mine, a scholar I think you'll find fascinating. His hovel isn't much, but he has the most extraordinary ideas about the principles of a Morethic Aldmeri tribe, the Sarmathi." "Under any circumstances, I would happily accept," said Scotty graciously. "But after weeks of sleeping on the ground or on a raft, and eating whatever I could scrounge, I feel the need for some indulgent creature comforts. And then, after a day or two, I'll petition the Sylvanar for safe passage to Cyrodiil." The men bade each other goodbye. Griff Malon gave him the address of his publisher in the Imperial city, which Scotty accepted and quickly forgot. The clerk wandered the streets of Sylvanar, crossing bridges of amber, admiring the petrified forest architecture. In front of a particularly estimable palace of silvery reflective crystal, he found Prathala Hall. He took the finest room and ordered a gluttonous meal of the finest quality. At a nearby table, he saw two very fat fellows, a man and a Bosmer, remarking how much finer the food was there than at the Sylvanar's palace. They began to discuss the war and some issues of finances and rebuilding provincial bridges. The man noticed Scotty looking at them, and his eyes flashed recognition.
"Scotty, is that you? Kennerith, where have you been? I've had to make all the contracts here on my own." At the sound of his voice, Scotty recognized him. The fat man was Leiades Juris, vastly engorged. Volume 6. Decimus Scotty sat down, listening to Leiades Juris. The clerk could hardly believe how fat his former colleague at Lord Atreus's building commission had become. The piquant aroma of the roasted meat dish before Scotty melted away. All the other sounds and textures of Prathala Hall vanished all around him, as if nothing else existed but the vast form of Juris. Scotty did not consider himself an emotional man, but he felt a tide flow over him at the sight and sound of the man whose badly written letters had been the guidepost that carried him from the Imperial city back in early Frostfall. "Where have you been?" Juris demanded again. "I told you to meet me in Falinesti weeks ago." "I was there weeks ago," Scotty stammered, too surprised to be indignant. "I got your note to meet you in Athe, and so I went there, but the Khajiit had burned it to the ground. Somehow, I found my way with the refugees in another village, and someone there told me that you had been killed." "And you believed that right away?" Juris sneered. "The fellow seemed very well informed about you. He was a clerk from Lord Vinek's building commission named Reglius, and he said that you had also suggested that he'd come down to Valenwood to profit from the war." "Oh, yes," said Juris after thinking a moment. "I recall the name now. Well, it's good for business to have two representatives from Imperial building commissions here. We just need to all coordinate our bids, and all should be well."
"Reglius is dead," said Scotty, "but I have his contracts from Lord Vinek's commission."
"Even better," gasped Juris, impressed. "I never knew you were such a ruthless competitor, Decimus Scotty. Yes, this could certainly improve our petition with the Sylvanar. Have I introduced you to Bast here?"
Scotty had only been dimly aware of the Bosmer's presence at the table with Juris, which was surprising given that the Mer's girth nearly equaled his dining companion. The clerk nodded to Bast coldly, still numb and confused. It had not left his mind that only an hour earlier, Scotty had intended to petition the Sylvanar for safe passage through the border back to Cyrodiil. The thought of doing business with Juris, after all, of profiting from Valenwood war with elsewhere, and now the second one with the Somerset Isle, seemed like something happening to another person.
"Your colleague and I were talking about the Sylvanar," said Bast, putting down the leg of mutton he had been gnawing on. "I don't suppose you've heard about his nature."
"A little, but nothing specific. I got the impression that he's very important and very peculiar."
"He's a representative of the people, legally, physically, and emotionally,"
explained Juris, a little annoyed at his new partner's lack of common knowledge.
"When they're healthy, so is he. When they're mostly female, so is he. When they cry for food or trade or an absence of foreign interference, he feels it too and makes laws accordingly. In a way, he's a despot, but he's the people's despot."
"That sounds," said Scotty, searching for the appropriate word, "like bunk."
"Perhaps it is," shrugged Bast.
But he has many rights as the voice of the people, including the granting of foreign building and trade contracts. It's not important whether you believe us. Just think of the Sylvanar as being like one of your mad emperors, like Pelagius. The problem facing us now is that since Valenwood is being attacked on all sides, the Sylvanar's aspect is now one of distrust and fear of foreigners. The one hope of his people, and thus of the Sylvanar himself, is that the Emperor will intervene and stop the war.
Will he? Asked Scotty.
You know as well as we do that the Emperor has not been himself lately.
Juris helped himself to Regulus's satchel and pulled out the blank contracts.
Who knows what he'll choose to do or not do? That reality is not our concern, but these blessings from the late good Sir Regulus make our job much simpler.
They discussed how they would represent themselves to the Sylvanar into the evening. Scotty ate continuously, but not nearly so much as Juris and Bast. When the sun had begun to rise in the hills, its light reddening through the crystal walls of the tavern, Juris and Bast left to their rooms at the palace, granted to them diplomatically in lieu of an actual immediate audience with the Sylvanar. Scotty went to his room. He thought about staying up a little longer to ruminate over Juris's plans and see what might be the flaw in them, but upon touching the cool, soft bed, he immediately fell asleep. The next afternoon, Scotty awoke, feeling himself again. In other words, timid. For several weeks now, he had been a creature bent on mere survival. He had been driven to exhaustion, attacked by several jungle beasts, starved, nearly drowned, and forced into discussions of ancient Aldmeri poetical works. The discussion he had with Juris and Bast about how to dupe the Sylvanar into signing their contracts seemed perfectly reasonable then. Scotty dressed himself in his old battered clothes and went downstairs in search of food and a peaceful place to think.
"You're up,"
cried Bast upon seeing him.
"We should go to the palace now."
"Now?" whined Scotty. "Look at me. I need new clothes. This isn't the way one should dress to pay a call on a prostitute, let alone the voice of the people of Valenwood. I haven't even bathed."
"You must cease from this moment forward being a clerk, and become a student of mercantile trade,"
said Leides Juris grandly, taking Scotty by the arm and leading him into the sunlit boulevard outside.
"The first rule is to recognize what you represent to the prospective client, and what angle best suits you. You cannot dazzle him with opulent fashion and professional bearing, my dear boy, and it would be fatal if you attempted to. Trust me on this. Several others beside Bast and I are guests at the palace, and they have made the error of appearing too eager, too formal, too ready for business. They will never be granted audience with the Sylvanar, but we have remained aloof ever since the initial rejection. I've dallied about the court, spread my knowledge of life in the Imperial city, had my ears pierced, attended promenades, eaten and drunk of all that was given to me. I dare say I've put on a pound or two. The message we sent is clear. It is in his, not our, best interest to meet."
"Our plan worked,"
added Bast.
"When I told his minister that our Imperial representative had arrived, and that we were at last willing to meet with the Sylvanar this morning, we were told to bring you there straight away."
"Aren't we late then?" asked Scotty.
"Very,"
laughed Juris.
"But that's again part of the angle we're representing. Benevolent disinterest. Remember not to confuse the Sylvanar with conventional nobility. His is the mind of the common people. When you grasp that, you'll understand how to manipulate him."
Juris spent the last several minutes of the walk through the city expounding on his theories about what Valenwood needed, how much, and at what price. They were staggering figures, far more construction and far higher cost than anything Scotty had been used to dealing with. He listened carefully. All around them, the city of Sylvanar revealed itself, glass and flower, roaring winds and beautiful inertia. When they reached the palace of the Sylvanar, Decimus Scotty stopped, stunned. Juris looked at him for a moment and then laughed.
"It's quite bizarre, isn't it?"
That it was. A frozen scarlet burst of twisted, uneven spires, as if a rival sun rising. A blossom the size of a village, where courtiers and servants resembled nothing so much as insects walked about it, sucking its ichor. Entering over a bent, petal-like bridge, the three walked through the palace of unbalanced walls. Where the partitions bent close together and touched, there was a shaded hall or a small chamber. Where they warped away from one another, there was a courtyard.
There were no doors anywhere. No any way to get to the Sylvanar but by crossing through the entire spiral of the palace, through meetings and bedrooms and dining halls, past dignitaries, consorts, musicians, and many guards.
It's an interesting place, said Bast, but not very much privacy. Of course, that suits the Sylvanar well.
When they reached the inner corridors, 2 hours after they first entered the palace, guards brandishing blades and bows stopped them.
"We have an audience with the Sylvanar," said Juris patiently. "This is Lord Decimus Scotti, the Imperial representative."
One of the guards disappeared down the winding corridor and returned moments later with a tall, proud Bosmer clad in a loose robe of patchwork leather. He was the Minister of Trade. "The Sylvanar wishes to speak with Lord Decimus Scotti alone." It was not the place to argue or show fear, so Scotti stepped forward, not even looking toward Juris and Bast. He was certain they were showing their masks of benevolent indifference. Following the minister into the audience chamber, Scotti recited to himself all the facts and figures Juris had presented to him. He willed himself to remember the angle and the image he must project. The audience chamber of the Sylvanar was an enormous dome where the walls bent from bowl-shaped at the base inward to almost meet at the top. A thin ray of sunlight streamed through the fissure hundreds of feet above and directly upon the Sylvanar, who stood upon a puff of shimmering gray powder. For all the wonder of the city and the palace, the Sylvanar himself looked perfectly ordinary. An average, blandly handsome, slightly tired-looking, extraordinary wood elf of the type one might see in any capital in the Empire. It was only when he stepped from the dais that Scotti noticed an eccentricity in his appearance. He was very short. "I had to speak with you alone," said the Sylvanar in a voice common and unrefined. "May I see your papers?" Scotti handed him the blank contracts from Lord Vernek's building commission. The Sylvanar studied them, running his finger over the embossed seal of the Emperor, before handing them back. He suddenly seemed shy, looking to the floor. "There are many charlatans in my court who wish to benefit from the wars. I thought you and your colleagues were among them, but those contracts are genuine." "Yes, they are," said Scotti calmly. The Sylvanar's conventional aspect made it easy for Scotti to speak, with no formal greetings, no deference, exactly as Juris had instructed. "It seems most sensible to begin straight away talking about the roads which need to be rebuilt, and then the harbors that the Altmeri have destroyed, and then I can give you my estimates on the cost of resupplying and renovating the trade routes." "Why hasn't the Emperor seen fit to send a representative when the war with Elsewhere began 2 years ago?" asked the Sylvanar glumly. Scotti thought a moment before replying of all the common Bosmeri he had met in Valenwood, the greedy, frightened mercenaries who had escorted him from the border, the hard-drinking revelers and expert pest-exterminating archers in the Western Cross of Falinesti, nosy old Mother Pascost in Havel Slump, Captain Balfix, the poor sadly reformed pirate, the terrified but hopeful refugees of Athe and Grenos, the mad, murderous, self-devouring wild hunt of Vindisi, the silent, dour boatman hired by Griff Malin, the degenerate, grasping Bast. If one creature represented their total disposition, and that of many more throughout the province, what would be his personality? Scotti was a clerk by occupation and nature, instinctively comfortable cataloging and filing, making things fit in a system. If the soul of Valenwood were to be filed, where would it be put? The answer came upon him almost before he posed himself the question. Denial. "I'm afraid that question doesn't interest me," said Scotti. "Now, can we get back to the business at hand?" All afternoon, Scotti and the Sylvanar discussed the pressing needs of Valenwood. Every contract was filled and signed. So much was required, and there were so many costs associated that addendums and codicils had to be scribbled into the margins of the papers, and those had to be re-signed. Scotti maintained his benevolent indifference, but he found that dealing with the Sylvanar was not quite the same as dealing with a simple, sullen child. The voice of the people knew certain practical, everyday things very well. The yields of fish, the benefits of trade, the condition of every township and forest in his province. "We will have a banquet tomorrow night to celebrate this commission," said the Sylvanar at last. "Best make it tonight," replied Scotti. "We should leave for Cyrodiil with the contracts tomorrow, so I'll need safe passage to the border. We best not waste any more time." "Agreed," said the Sylvanar, and called for his Minister of Trade to put his seal on the contracts and arrange for the feast. Scotti left the chamber and was greeted by Bast and Juris. Their faces showed the strain of maintaining the illusion of unconcern for too many hours. As soon as they were out of sight of the guards, they begged Scotty to tell them all. When he showed them the contract, Bast began weeping with delight.
Anything about the Sylvanar that surprised you?
Asked Juris. I hadn't expected him to be half my height.
Was he?
Juris looked mildly surprised.
He must have shrunk since I tried to have an audience with him earlier. Maybe there is something to all that nonsense about him being affected by the plight of his people.
Volume 7. Scene, Sylvanar, Valenwood. Date, 13 Sun's Dusk, 3rd Era, 397. The banquet at the Palace of the Sylvanar was well attended by every jealous bureaucrat and trader who had attempted to contract the building of Valenwood. They looked on Decimus Scotty, Leides Juris, and Bast with undisguised hatred. It made Scotty very uncomfortable, but Juris delighted in it. As the servants brought in platter after platter of roasted meats, Juris poured himself a cup of jaga and toasted the clerk.
I can confess it now,
said Juris.
I had grave doubts about inviting you to join me on this adventure. All the other clerks and agents of building commissions I contacted were more outwardly aggressive, but none of them made it through, let alone to the audience chamber of the Sylvanar, let alone broker deals on their own like you did. Come, have a cup of jaga with me.
No thank you, said Scotty. I had too much of that drug in Falinesti and nearly got sucked dry by a giant tick because of it. I'll find something else to drink. Scotty wandered about the hall until he saw some diplomats drinking mugs of a steaming brown liquid poured from a large silver urn. He asked them if it was tea. Tea made from leaves? Scoffed the first diplomat. Not in Valenwood. This is rot meth. Scotty poured himself a mug and took a tentative sip. It was gamey, bitter and sugared, and very salty. At first it seemed very disagreeable to his palate, but a moment later he found he had drained the mug and was pouring another. His body tingled. All the sounds in the chamber seemed oddly disjointed, but not frighteningly so. So you're the fellow who got the Sylvanar to sign all those contracts, said the second diplomat. That must have required some deep negotiation. Not at all, just a little basic understanding of mercantile trading, grinned Scotty, pouring himself a third mug of rot meth. The Sylvanar was very eager to involve the Imperial state with the affairs of Valenwood. I was very eager to take a percentage of the commission. With all that blessed eagerness, it was merely a matter of putting quill to contract, bless you. You have been in the employ of His Imperial Majesty very long? Asked the first diplomat. It's a bit more complicated than that in the Imperial City. Between you and me, I don't really have a job. I used to work for Lord Atreus and his building commission, but I got sacked. And then the contracts are from Lord Vanek and his building commission, because I got him from this fellow Reglius, who is a competitor, but still a very fine fellow, until he was made dead by those Khajiit. Scotty drained his fifth mug. When I go back to the Imperial City, then the real negotiations can begin, bless you. I can go to my old employer and to Lord Vanek and say, look here, you, which one of you wants these commissions? And then they'll fall over each other to take them from me. It will be a bidding war for my percentage, the likes of which no one, nowhere, has ever seen. So you're not a representative of His Imperial Majesty the Emperor? Asked the first diplomat. Didn't you hear what I said? You stupid? Scotty felt a surge of rage, which quickly subsided. He chuckled and poured himself a seventh mug. The building commissions are privately owned, but they're still representatives of the Emperor. So I'm a representative of the Emperor. Or I will be, when I get these contracts in. It's very complicated. I can understand why you're not following me. Bless you, it's all like the poet said. A dance in fire, if you follow the illusion. That is to say, illusion. And your colleagues, are they representatives of the Emperor? Asked the second diplomat. Scotty burst into laughter, shaking his head. The diplomats bade him their respects and went to talk to the minister. Scotty stumbled out of the palace and reeled through the strange, organic avenues and boulevards of the city. It took him several hours to find his way to Perthala Hall and his room. Once there, he slept, very nearly, on his bed. The next morning he woke to Juris and Bast in his room, shaking him. He felt half asleep and unable to open his eyes fully, but otherwise fine. The conversation with the diplomats floated in his mind like a haze, like an obscure childhood memory. What in Mara's name is rotmeth? He asked quickly.
Rancid, strongly fermented meat juices with lots of spices to kill the poisons,
Smiled Bast.
I should have warned you to stay with Jaga.
You must understand the meat mandate by now,
Laughed Juris.
These Bosmeri would rather eat each other than touch the fruit of the vine or the field.
What did I say to those diplomats? Cried Scotty, panicking.
Nothing bad, apparently,
Said Juris, pulling out some papers.
Your escorts are downstairs to bring you to the Imperial province. Here are your papers of safe passage. The Sylvanar seems very impatient about business proceeding forward rapidly. He promises to send you some sort of rare treasure when the contracts are fulfilled. See, he's already given me something.
Juris showed off his new bejeweled earring, a beautiful, large-faceted ruby. Bast showed that he had a similar one. The two fat fellows left the room so Scotty could dress and pack. A full regiment of the Sylvanar's guards was on the street in front of the tavern. They surrounded a carriage crested with the official arms of Valenwood. Still dazed, Scotty climbed in, and the captain of the guard gave the signal. They began a quick gallop. Scotty shook himself and then peered behind. Bast and Juris were waving him goodbye. "Wait!" Scotty cried. "Aren't you coming back to the Imperial province too?"
The Sylvanar asked that we stay behind as Imperial representatives,
yelled Leides Juris.
in case there's a need for more contracts and negotiations. He's appointed us undrape, some sort of special honor for foreigners at court. Don't worry, lots of banquets to attend. You can handle the negotiations with Vanek and Atreus yourself, and we'll keep things settled here.
Juris continued to yell advice about business, but his voice became indistinct with distance. Soon it disappeared altogether as the convoy rounded the streets of Sylvanar. The jungle loomed suddenly, and then they were in it. Scotty had only gone through it by foot or along the rivers by slow-moving boats. Now it flashed all around him in profusions of greens. The horses seemed even faster moving through the underbrush than on the smooth paths of the city. None of the weird sounds or dank smells of the jungle penetrated the escort. It felt to Scotty as if he were watching a play about the jungle with a background of a quickly moving scrim, which offered only the merest suggestion of the place. So it went for 2 weeks. There was lots of food and water in the carriage with the clerk, so he merely ate and slept as the caravan pressed endlessly on. From time to time, he'd hear the sound of blades clashing, but when he looked around, whatever had attacked the caravan had long since been left behind. At last, they reached the border, where an Imperial garrison was stationed. Scotty presented the soldiers who met the carriage with the papers. They asked him a barrage of questions that he answered monosyllabically, and then let him pass. It took several more days to arrive at the gates of the Imperial city. The horses that had flown so fast through the jungle now slowed down in the unfamiliar territory of the wooded Colovian estates. By contrast, the cries of his province's birds and the smells of his province's plant life brought Decimus Scotty alive. It was as if he had been dreaming all the past months. At the gates of the city, Scotty's carriage door was open for him, and he stepped out on uncertain legs. Before he had a moment to say something to the escort, they had vanished, galloping back south through the forest. The first thing he did now that he was home was go to the closest tavern and have tea and fruit and bread. If he never ate meat again, he told himself, that would suit him very nicely. Negotiations with Lord Atreus and Lord Vanek proceeded immediately thereafter. It was most agreeable. Both commissions recognized how lucrative the rebuilding of Valenwood would be for their agency. Lord Vanek claimed, quite justifiably, that as the contracts had been written on forms notarized by his commission, he had the legal right to them. Lord Atreus claimed that Decimus Scotty was his agent and representative, and that he had never been released from employment. The Emperor was called to arbitrate, but he claimed to be unavailable. His advisor, the Imperial battle mage Jagar Tharn, had disappeared long ago and could not be called on for his wisdom and impartial mediation. Scotty lived very comfortably off the bribes from Lord Atreus and Lord Vanek. Every week, a letter would arrive from Juris or Bast asking about the status of negotiations. Gradually, these letters ceased coming, and more urgent ones came from the Minister of Trade and the Sylvanar himself. The War of the Blue Divide with Somerset Isle ended with the Altmeri winning several new coastal islands from the Wood Elves. The war with Elsewhere continued, ravaging the eastern borders of Valenwood. Still, Vanek and Atreus fought over who would help. One fine morning in the early spring of the year 3E398, a courier arrived at Decimus Scotty's door. Lord Vanek has won the Valenwood Commission and requests that you and the contracts come to his hall at your earliest convenience. Has Lord Atreus decided not to challenge further? Asked Scotty. He's been unable to, having died very suddenly, just now, from a terribly unfortunate incident, said the courier. Scotty had wondered how long it would be before the Dark Brotherhood was brought in for final negotiations. As he walked toward Lord Vinek's building commission, a long, severe piece of architecture on a minor but respectable plaza, he wondered if he had played the game, as he ought to have. Could Lord Vinek be so rapacious as to offer him a lower percentage of the commission now that his chief competitor was dead? Thankfully, he discovered, Lord Vinek had already decided to pay Scotty what he had proposed during the heat of the winter negotiations. His advisors had explained to him that other, lesser building commissions might come forward unless the matter were handled quickly and fairly.
"Glad we have all the legal issues done with," said Lord Vinek fondly. "Now we can get to the business of helping the poor Bosmeri and collecting the profits. It's a pity you weren't our representative for all the troubles with Bender Mock and the Arnesian business. But there will be plenty more wars, I'm sure of that."
Scotty and Lord Vinek sent word to the Sylvanar that at last they were prepared to honor the contracts. A few weeks later, they held a banquet in honor of the profitable enterprise. Decimus Scotty was the darling of the Imperial city, and no expense was spared to make it an unforgettable evening. As Scotty met the nobles and wealthy merchants who would be benefiting from his business dealings, an exotic but somehow faintly familiar smell rose in the ballroom. He traced it to its source, a thick roasted slab of meat, so long and thick it covered several platters. The Cyrodiilic revelers were eating it ravenously, unable to find the words to express their delight at its taste and texture. "It's like nothing I've ever had before. It's like pig-fed venison. Do you see the marbling of fattened meat? It's a masterpiece." Scotty went to take a slice, but then he saw something embedded deep in the dried and rendered roast. He nearly collided with his new employer, Lord Vinek, as he stumbled back. "Where did this come from?" Scotty stammered.
"From our client, the Sylvanar," beamed his lordship. "It's some kind of local delicacy they call unthrapa."
Scotty vomited and didn't stop for some time. It cast a rather temporary pall on the evening, but when Decimus Scotty was carried off to his manor house, the guests continued to dine. The unthrapa was the delight of all. Even more so when Lord Vinek himself took a slice and found the first of 2 rubies buried within. How very clever of the Bosmer to invent such a dish, the Cyrodiils agreed.